The Bernie Bros missed the point on Democrats, the working class, and who abandoned who. Chris Graham here. On Augusta Free Press, a group that hails itself as being born out of Senator Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign, is blaming Kamala Harris's 2024 election loss on Democrats not being willing or at the least able to connect with working class voters. Okay, I'll take the bait. Tell me then, what exactly did Donald Trump do to connect with working class voters again? Because I know the answer, and I bet those Bernie Sanders folks do too. Now, here's a quote from Joseph Gevarghese, the executive director of Our Revolution. That's the group that grew out of the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign. Despite Trump's clear track record of broken promises on health care, wages, and jobs, the Democratic Party didn't lean into a strong critique of his economic failures. Instead, we saw Harris appeal to affluent voters while neglecting the very people whose lives are most directly impacted by rising costs and stagnant wages. When voters look for answers to their economic struggles and don't see them on the Democratic platform, they turn elsewhere. Now, that'd be great if it were true. And let's get real about this. What did Trump do to appeal to working class voters? And what he did is, not novel to himself, to even most recent modern political American history, and certainly not against the backdrop of 2+ centuries of American political history. Remember that the founding documents of these United States formalized structural economic inequality, not only codifying the institution of slavery, but rewarding states that benefited economically from slave labor with additional political representation. That's why we're stuck with the electoral college we've got. It's a function of slavery. Now, when slavery was outlawed after the Civil War, Southern political elites maintained political power by denying blacks the right to vote and convincing working class whites that their greatest threat was blacks trying to take their low wage jobs and not the systematic subjugation of both poor whites and poor blacks. It's divide and conquer politics. Familiar, right? All Trump did in his 2024 campaign was substitute immigrants for blacks and basically make the message that the immigrants are coming for your jobs and the Biden-Harris administration created millions of jobs, but they weren't for you, they were for them. They call it resentment politics for a reason. I'm trying to figure out how Democrats could have done anything to counter this, considering how our political culture works. It's easy to exploit higher prices resulting from inflation as being the fault of the party in power, and it's profoundly difficult to get across in a soundbite the reality. The reality being that the reason we had inflation was the bipartisan decision that was made during the pandemic, bipartisan, Democrats, Republicans, and Trump. That's tripartisan, but to print trillions of dollars to distribute out to people in the form of stimulus checks. Remember, Donald Trump put his name on some of those to keep the economy from totally cratering until we could get the vaccines out. Another Trump initiative he actually claimed credit for and then denied. A natural consequence of all that money being printed and sent out to people, was always going to be an extended soft landing that would include a period of inflation. That was always going to be the case. The American media made it out that the inflation was something unique to the US when it wasn't. And in fact, the US economy fared better than any other in the industrialized world post-pandemic. But the message that people got from the media was prices are up and Democrats aren't doing anything about it. And even when the inflation rate finally got back to where we wouldn't notice it anymore, that prevailing narrative was still there. Now try to make that bite-sized. The only thing I can come up with is, hey, you think inflation's bad, at least you're not standing in a soup line. That's the best I can do. That's not accounting for the fact that our media ecosystem is actually a media entertainment complex, with the most watched cable TV news network, Fox News, less about disseminating news than serving the propagandistic aims of conservative political and economic elites. Southern elites in the Jim Crow era could have only wished they had a Fox News to make their job this easy. It's against this backdrop that Our Revolution sent out a press release to highlight its thoughts on the idea that Democrats are somehow neglecting working class voters, which is a ridiculous proposition. Who is leading the fight, for example, to preserve Obamacare? Who fights private school vouchers that drain money for K-12 education? Who mustered the votes to pass the Inflation Reduction Act that put millions of people to work? Spoiler alert, it was not Donald Trump. A line in the release from Our Revolution made the point that a staggering realignment has occurred among working class voters, and it made me think, and I agree with them, but not in the way the Our Revolution folks would want me to agree with them. Now, here's a quote Another one from the group's press release. Many who previously backed Biden in 2020 turned to Trump this time, disillusioned by a Democratic Party that failed to address the affordability crisis and deliver meaningful economic policies. Now, you notice what's left out there, and I'm not leaving anything out of this press release and what I'm talking about here. There's nothing in there in terms of a critique of Donald Trump to fail to address the effects of inflation. Nothing from Donald Trump about delivering anything meaningful in terms of economic policies aside from promising to slap onerous tariffs on China that will push prices for imported goods through the roof. You think inflation was bad before, wait until those tariffs hit, and then not only will they raise prices, they're going to put a million people out of work just in year one. This is what the experts say, including experts on the conservative side of the equation. Now, it's interesting to me that DeSantis people have always proven to be incapable of pointing out the obvious about Trump. Back to the point, though, about the idea that we're in a political realignment, this is clearly the case, but not for the reasons that our revolution would have us believe. Now, here's another quote from Guy Varghese. I'm hopefully pronouncing that name right. While the Harris campaign focused on moderate coalitions and endorsements from Republicans like Liz Cheney, working families and young people who wanted economic and social justice felt ignored. Voters wanted a champion who spoke directly to their needs, not a campaign captured by wealthy donors and corporate interests. This is not reality. I can't help but say that. The problem here is that we're led to believe that working class voters felt abandoned by a Democratic campaign, quote, captured by wealthy donors and corporate interests. So in response, they cast their lots with the other campaign that's fully owned by wealthy donors and corporate interests, and which did nothing to reach out to them other than to play to racist fears that immigrants are going to take their jobs. Now, I'm a Democrat because I grew up in a low-income household. I'm authentic here as you can be. This is not an academic enterprise and not an intellectual exercise. I'm the child of teen parents. I bounced around from trailer park to park growing up. Working class struggles are real for me. I had a lot of dinners when I was growing up that had ketchup sandwiches. I still have a taste for ketchup sandwiches as a result. That's ketchup on bread. That's what we had a lot of nights. I had an aunt and uncle who ended up splitting up after their daughter was in a horrific car accident and the medical bills bankrupted them. The father had great insurance. They still went bankrupt because of this. If you want to know why I won't settle for anything less than universal health care, that's why. I am where I am personally because of public K to 12 and higher education. That's why I fight for our kids to have the same education that I did. The Democratic Party I've been involved with for decades fights for working class voters. It did not abandon the working class for moderate coalitions and Republicans like Liz Cheney. Democrats forged those alliances to try to cobble together a coalition because working class white voters that they're fighting for are abandoning them for the shiny objects promised to them by Donald Trump. This is just as poor Southern whites voted against their self-interest to pop up Jim Crow, thinking that keeping some others down was a better approach than working with those others to make life better for everybody involved. This is the tough spot Democrats are in. We're the ones who look out for the interests of the working class, but we can't get the white working class to want to partner with the black working class and the Latino working class. Until the Bernie Sanders folks can acknowledge that white racism is the root of the problem here, they're not going to get us closer to the solution we're all looking for. For Augusta Free Press, I am Chris Graham.